All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Reversing Your Autoimmune Story. So, in our last episode, Melissa and I spent quite a bit of time talking about food sensitivity and chronic inflammation, chronic illnesses, and whatnot that goes into that. And we hit on IgG and IgA, the immunoglobulin responses that happen with different food sensitivities. And today, as promised in our last episode, we are going to dive into IgE reactivity and what that means. Now, I want to preface this conversation with knowing that we do understand that there are some folks that are listening today that have mast cell syndrome, and that is an IgE response reactivity. But what we're going to talk about today is just because you have IgE reactivity does not mean that you have mast cell syndrome. So I don't want anybody jumping off the bridge and saying, my gosh, I have had food sensitivity testing, I have IgE reactivity, I must have mast cell syndrome. That is not the case. There's another piece that comes into mast cell syndrome, which has to do with a particular genetic snippet that is there. And so as we're talking, Melissa will weave some of that information into there, but I want to make sure that everybody takes a deep breath. And just because you have an IgE reactivity does not mean that you have mast cell syndrome. So this is an in-depth conversation today, and we're not prefacing it with a lot because I'm thinking that you've watched the previous episode on food sensitivity and chronic inflammation. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump into just what exactly is IgE reactivity and what does that mean? What does that look like? Like, what do we do then if we do have an IgE reactivity? So, Melissa?
Oh, excellent job prefacing everything. I love it. So IgE reactivity is when your body has a histamine response. So what that means is more like what we would think about of like a response to a food that happens within 10 to 20 to half an hour to an hour after you ingest that food. And whatever that means, maybe it's a bellyache, maybe it's nausea, maybe it's just like feeling hot. Your body starts to feel hot. It can be, all right, you're in the bathroom.
Ah,
Or it can be directly opposite. It's like, then you can't go to the bathroom for 2 days. It can be any number of responses that can happen in the body, but it's pretty quick. It's a histamine response. It can also be, if it's a very kind of a masterful response by the body, it can be something that we think about as far as an anaphylactic response.
mhm.
The throat beginning to swell, that kind of thing. Most of the time, though, when we have an IgD reaction, it is not nearly that big. It's more like, bellyache, or you just don't feel right. Or it's like, oh gosh, darn golly, I just don't know if I want to have that food ever again because I feel so icky.
Yeah. So, quick question though, here, since we are talking about it being a histamine response,
Mhm.
and we know that there are differences between well, I shouldn't say we know, but it's pretty common that we would say somebody has either a food allergy or a food sensitivity. Is this where that distinction comes in? And if we do have an IgE reactivity response to a certain food, does that food have to be eliminated forever?
Ooh, those are two big questions. So I'm going to take the first one, the first part of that. And like when we're doing investigation around what is potentially causing or having a causation of how we feel and how icky we feel, we'll have a food allergy test. That could be a prick test at the allergist, or it could be a blood test. But that's what they're looking for is an IgG reactivity, right? generally not looking for a sensitivity, which we talked about in our last. If you haven't seen our last episode, please go listen to it because we pick this apart in depth, right? So it's two separate types of reactivity. Usually a histamine response will build quickly and then it will go down quickly as well. Whereas if you have a food sensitivity, reactivity happening in the body, that's a slow build and then a slow go down, right? So it is very different. It is very different in how our bodies respond. But a lot of times when we're thinking about, does a food cause me issues? We're watching after each meal to see how we feel with the foods from that meal. So
Mhm.
what we're literally able to see is if we're having some level of a histamine response to that food because we're looking for symptomology.
That makes sense. Okay, very good. I just like interjecting personal stories here, and I'm thinking about this. So just in the last month or so, we had what I would say then was an IgE response with my son over
Mhm.
some oddly enough, some ramen noodles that he ate, right? And it was immediate, like breaking
Mhm.
out in hives and
Yep.
itchy eyes and having a little trouble breathing and just an immediate response within the hour or so of it
Yeah.
happening. And it actually took us a while to figure out, still even with that, what food was causing it. And the funny
Right.
thing is, because he had eaten this before and never had this response before. And I'm not trying to like go down a rabbit hole here, but I think it's really interesting to understand that even an IgE reactivity can happen to a food that maybe it didn't happen with before. And I know that's like a rabbit hole thing, but it's very possible to happen. So um, the second part of my question was, then does that mean that we just need to completely remove that food, never look at it, touch it, think about it ever again? Or because my son's quite sad about not being able to eat this food again, right?
Of course. Yeah. So literally what I would suggest is if you have an IgE reactivity to a food, I would cut it out hardcore for 4 to 6 months. That's about the time that it takes for antibodies that the body has built up to respond to that food, to cool, and literally to be retired by the body.
Nice.
And then you can give it a shot again, see how he feels with that food, and see what the response is.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Um, if it's a like a crazy response, like we hear about some peanut allergy responses, if we have that level of a histamine response, I would suggest no.
Right.
But because it was a fairly light response, I
Mm.
mean, it was big enough to notice, that's for sure, but fairly light, I'd say take that food out for 4 to 6 months and then just try a little bit
Yeah.
and have some tools on hand, some Benadryl or some sort of antihistamine type support nearby and try it on purpose
Mm-hmm.
and look to see how the body responds.
Yeah. So what is it? Like I know that we want to, maybe get back into the graphic again that we showed last time, but when it comes to an IgE response to a food, and
Mm-hmm.
it is, we're talking about a histamine response, which means the body is creating a
Mm-hmm.
histamine, right, in the body, which as we would call an allergic reaction, right? That's the body's natural response. And
Yeah,
please also understand that's not a bad thing. Your body's doing its job, it's protecting itself from whatever invader is coming in.
exactly.
But let's talk about, why does that happen? And like we've talked about the symptomology, but why does it happen? And what then happens afterward? And how do we address this issue, you know, on a more broad scale, not just my son here?
Yeah. I love using stories So thank you for sharing about your son, because it brings it into real life, right? So there are various things that can create or set the stage for the body to start responding in this way to a food or some sort of a trigger that it didn't respond to in this way before. So generally what that is either a big emotional something. It could be like big T, little t trauma, you name it, whatever, but an emotional upheaval of some sort for the person. And that can only be gauged by the person themselves. Or it could be something like an introduction to a bacteria or a viral load or something else the body is dealing with already in the background. And it is hypersensitive to anything new because it's already maxed out.
Yeah. So one of the things that I thought with my son, just to keep tying in a story here, is, he's 12. We're in puberty. There's hormones that are happening, right? There's lots of changes happening in the body. And so that, like you're saying, there's something else going on in the background that then that food comes in and the body's like, wait a minute. I normally can deal with that. But right now I'm doing so many other things. I can't deal with that right now. And so I'm going to send the histamines out to deal with that.
Yeah. And the histamines are the green beret.
Yeah.
They're your body's top, how do I say, top people.
Yeah.
Really deal with something big.
Yeah.
It's like we need to deal with it big, fast, over, done. We've got this other stuff over here we need to deal with.
Yep. Very good. Very good. So if that's, go ahead.
Well, something to think about is that understanding as well that whatever this is, the response in the body, to not just let it be the central focal point, because it gets to be, right? It's the one that's flashing red. It's the one that's in your face, right? But being able to ask the question, okay, what set the table for this to happen, can be really, really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you said something that was really important. I tied in the potential for hormone imbalances happening that could be what was going on, but you were talking about an emotional upheaval in the body, right? Something that, and this is a very hard one for people to really get a hold of, but it is very key. It is very important, is that your emotions can upset the systems in your body, very much so. And the reason why is because, and I want to just kind of simplify this a little bit for everybody. I could go ethereal with this, right, on how emotions affect the body and what's going on. But I also can bring it down to a very scientific level too, to make this tangible for people. If you think about when you have an emotion of any type, it creates a systematic response in your endocrine system, which is your hormonal system, right? And so if you have anger, if you have frustration, if you have stress, that's going to increase cortisol levels, right? If you have, you're happy and you have a hit of dopamine or, serotonin, oxytocin, the love hormone, any of that, right? It changes the balance in the body. But let's focus just on when we are talking about an emotional response and an emotional upheaval, we are talking about usually what we would label as a negative emotion that then, like I said, creates that cortisol rush, creates adrenaline rush, creates so many different firings and systems in the body. And if you are going through, you said it could be, big T trauma, it could be little T trauma. So, it could be the loss of a loved one, which we would call that a big trauma, right? That could happen. Or it could be an everyday ongoing type of trauma that, your work is like really stressful. It's really hard. And every day when you wake up, it is hard for you to even want to go to that job, let alone perform well there. And so that's chronic stress that's happening and coming in. And your body is so busy dealing with
Yeah.
trying to balance out the systems in your
Yeah.
body, that it could take it just a food you eat on a regular basis and all of a sudden go, oh, nope, we don't have time to deal with that today.
Yeah.
So just to kind of tie in what Melissa is talking about when it can be an emotional upheaval in the body that can cause something like this. Scientifically, it comes back to the same thing. It's a systematic imbalance in the system.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
And so let's talk a little bit about, like, explain to us in a little more detail, and maybe you want to bring up your chart that we were looking at in the
Sure.
previous episode. Let's kind of walk through this IgE reactivity
Mhm.
and what that looks like when
Love it.
you see it.
Awesome. So the very first thing I want to share with you is that reactivity actually mostly lives in the cells throughout the body. This is your cellular protection system. Like the other responses that we were chatting about, the IgG and the IgA, those are like the IgA is primarily around the intestinal tract, right? IgG, a lot of that is in the like your tissues. IgE is cellular. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. It
And
does.
I hope we can see the absolute brilliance of our immune system, right? We've got the first guys, you know, first touch, mucosal layer, anything that's open to the outside of the body. And then if something gets past that defense, then it hits whatever is in the tissue, right? The immune system activity in the tissue. And if it gets past that defense, then it gets to the cells. And this is my thought, is that by the time it gets past those other gates and it gets to the cell response, that's one of the reasons why this response can be so, is because that's it. I mean, there's no further. We're made up of cells. And if something is getting that far past our protective system, then it needs a hard hitting response. The body is, holy crap.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
but that's also why a lot of people don't have this level of response, because it's already taken care of by the other layers or other circles of protection. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yeah. And so I'm trying to just think through this and kind of break it down with an illustration that someone can understand as well. So, we're talking about the IgA, yeah, the IgA response being the mucosal lining, right? So that's like an entire system
Yep.
in the body that
Yep.
will
People's blood.
have a response to that, right?
Mhm.
And then if we go over to the IgG, now we're talking about it says most body cells, right? But this is tissue that it will affect. And the tissues in your body, let's talk about, the skin organ. The entire thing is the tissue of that. The heart, this is all cardiovascular tissue. This, if it's pain in a shoulder, or it's pain in a muscle, or it's migrating like that, that's muscular tissue. That's, connective tissue that it can
Mhm.
get into. And then if we go down to an IgE response, though, now this is cellular. And the reason that this is, in my mind, the reason that this is so big and why the body has such a big response to it is because it's getting into an individual cell. So your tissue is all made up of multiple cells, right? And these cells multiply in
Mhm.
order to continue to regenerate this
Mhm.
tissue. And if a single cell, if it's getting into the cellular level, now we're going to have a problem with regeneration of cells that's going to create the tissue that is there, which is why the body goes, this has to stop right now. Because if this doesn't stop right now at the cellular level, we're going to have bigger problems overall. So I'm hoping that that helps to break it down for everybody to understand what we're talking about.
I love this conversation. Oh, you guys, this is amazing. Yes, I love geeky stuff, but I love bringing it into real life, real talk. How can we understand this on a basic level? Because something I think we start to conceive in our minds is that there's no way to understand our bodies. Yes, we're complex. We're beautifully complex, but we're also beautifully simple.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
So let's talk about IgE. And the area of origin is mast cells. So I really want to kind of lean into this with you around what even is that? But this is the cell deep protective mechanism. And this is where, if you've experienced mast cell syndrome or anything that kind of resembles that, your ears are probably pricked up to really be like, okay, what is this? So I want to lean into like the difference here. So if someone has mast cell syndrome or mast cell continuous activation, it is when the body has this type of a response, but doesn't have the mechanism in place or that's impaired for the body to actually turn that off. Does that make sense? It just keeps going at
Mhm.
some level. A lot of times that is caused by a genetic SNP, the inability of the body to produce the enzymes needed to break down the actual histamine in the body. So it just keeps going. The body can't like turn it off. So one of the questions I'm asked often is how do we actually do something about that without like taking out the whole immune system?
Mhm.
And if we understand exactly what genetic SNPs are active, we can supplement very effectively for that. Does it ever make it so this will never happen in the body again? No, but we can modify it gently without damaging the immune system. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does make sense. I like where this is going.
Love it. So when we have this type of a histamine response, an IgE response, the half-life is 1 to 3 days. So that can be a response anywhere from, 10 minutes, 5 minutes, you name it, immediately, and out to about 3 days. So the after effects of the body really being able to how do I say, settle, but also break apart and absorb or methylate the actual histamine created in this response can take a minute.
Yeah, absolutely. So real quick, and I know I keep interrupting you, but I want to make sure that we are speaking at a level that everybody's grabbing a hold of. So you used a word here of methylate. I just want, and I'm going to tie it back to when you were talking about mast cells. So methylating is the actually like getting rid of those histamines, right? Via enzymes. And there's many different methylation processes that happen in the body, but this is what we're talking about here is you have a histamine response. The histamines are released into the body in order to, stop that response that is happening. And then methylation is there are different enzymes that come out then, antibodies that will take care of getting rid of the histamine that's been released in the body as protection. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. Because the body has to break that apart and we need the enzymatic action to be able to break that apart. And eventually it goes through the liver. There's quite a few different systems that have to happen for that to be methylated completely, goes out in your body waste.
Mhm.
Very efficient,
It's really cool actually how it all works.
right? So the thing to remember about this is that this is a true allergy. So this is what would be found if you went to an allergist and had a prick test or a blood allergy test. But this is not going to show up food sensitivity. It
Mhm.
can't. It's a completely different reaction chain, if you will. So what we see most often as symptoms is things affecting the airways, like you were already saying, affecting the skin or intestinal tract, hives, anaphylaxis, rash, swelling, you name it.
Okay, so that this is the differentiation between the food sensitivity and an actual food allergy.
Exactly.
And I think this is really important to point out because I have had, several clients come to me and tell me that they are allergic
Yeah.
to a particular food because it causes an adverse reaction that they are aware of,
Yep.
but it isn't actually an allergy that they have to it. It's a food sensitivity
Yeah.
that they have to it. And I just think that's a really, really important differentiation to make
Yeah.
in how the body is responding to something and just how critical it can be, right? There's a huge difference.
Yeah.
Huge difference.
This is something that I wish every neurologist, gastroenterologist, and specialist in this area would truly understand, because it could help them think about what's happening in the body in a different way.
Hmm. Absolutely. So let's just unpack that a little bit more. So, Melissa, when someone comes to you and, in the initial intake process, they're telling you all of these foods that, they're allergic to or they don't have a good response to, and they've eliminated all of this stuff out of their diet.
Mhm.
What what does it mean when you actually go in and
Mhm.
we do the food sensitivity test and we start reading this test and we start understanding the body much
Mhm.
better there?
Yep.
How does that impact their overall progress then as they are going through to be able to understand the difference in these different types of IG reactions?
Mm, I love this question so very much. It takes the mystery out,
Hmm.
literally, and it creates a deeper understanding about what your body is doing and why. Because I'm just going to a make up a thing to kind of illustrate this. Say we do say I have a client come in that they know anytime they have lobster, things don't go well. They know every time that they have a salad, generally, not always, something really doesn't go well. But they have a long running systemic inflammation that has begun to develop into something like a thyroid imbalance. Okay. So we do a food sensitivity test and we learn that they have an actual IgE reaction to lobster. That's going to be maybe you shouldn't have that for quite a while conversation. We also do a food sensitivity, learn in the food sensitivity test that they have an and let me get this over here out of my way. It's bugging me. They have an IgG reaction to the tomatoes that they love to have in their salad.
Mm.
That's a long running inflammatory response. But we also learned that they have an IgA reaction, which is long running but shorter half life response that creates an intestinal upset for them to the broccoli. So it helps us understand what is actually causing these specific levels of reactivity, and we can address that,
Mm.
right?
Mhm.
But we can also see that they love to have cheese on their salad. But when we get the test results back, they're fine with it.
Yeah.
So we do a in-depth gut study with them, and we understand that their body is not producing the stomach acid and bile and digestive enzymes enough to be able to break down the dairy protein.
Mm-hmm.
So now we know why the cheese doesn't work so well. It's not that they're having an actual immune response. It's just that their body doesn't have what it needs as far as digestive secretions to be able to break that apart well and process that through the body.
Right. Okay. So this brings up an interesting question that, ties into this whole food sensitivity testing is we can then determine why you're having a sensitivity to this food, right? And I think this is so important because just doing a test and saying, "Oh, you have a sensitivity to this food, just get rid of it, don't eat it anymore, whatever." That's very surface level, right? But if we then go that step deeper and we look at, okay, so what is the deficiency in the body that is making it where, Sally over here can eat 2 tons of cheese, and I'm exaggerating, and she's fine. But if, Joe has a piece of cheese, he's in trouble, right? And in the bathroom for long periods of time. Okay, something's different. Now, good question here then is, okay, Melissa, so then how do we address that? Can that be addressed? If somebody has an intolerance to something, how can we address it?
Oh my gosh, I love this conversation. I don't get to talk about this stuff very often except to clients. Oh, it's like having a piece of cake with ice cream.
Ooh.
So, depending on the reactivity, like what's actually happening, the immunoglobulin response to the food depends on what we do with it. So if it's a histamine response, we take it out hardcore. If it's a highly responded to IgG or IgA response, we take that out too.
Mhm.
Because we want the immune system to take a breath. And if we find out there are foods that the body does not have the digestive secretions to process, we may take those out for a little bit or really reduce the intake of that food. But then we start to look at what is not working in the body. Why is the body not producing enough stomach acid? Is it because we have H. pylori? Is it because they've been under constant stress? And we start really investigating, why do we not have enough stomach acid? Or what's happening in the bile flow? Is the liver stopped up? Is the gallbladder stopped up? Do we have very sluggish bile? And we work on that. And we look at the pancreas. How is that doing with creating the digestive enzymes that you need to actually break down the food inside the small intestine? We start picking apart what's going on here and why, because those same systems that aren't working at 100% that are affecting how your body is breaking down the cheese in this instance is also really affecting some other major systems in the body. So when we work on the whys and get everything working how it's supposed to, we're not just working on how your body digests the cheese, we're working on the entire body system. Does that make
Mhm.
sense?
It really does. And it actually brought up a question for me that I can hear people asking this question right now and going, okay, so fine, I'll just take some digestive enzymes. I'll just take some probiotics or some prebiotics, and I'll continue to eat the food that I want to eat, and I'll just take this, and that should make it all better, right? Well, do you want to take that supplement for the rest of your life?
And it's not addressing the why.
Hmm.
It's not addressing the why.
So to like stack on this, because I'm a proponent for digestive enzymes, right? And I know that you are too, right? Digestive enzymes are amazing. They help support the body. They help us to, and I want to say this because I mentioned this in the last episode. Our food is not the same as it used to be, which means it does not have as high of nutritional content as it used to have. So the reason that I and Melissa both like digestive enzymes is because it allows you to extract more nutrients out of the food that we have available to us, right? So that's the importance of digestive enzymes. It is not to give your body something that it's not doing on its own so it doesn't have to do it. That's
Exactly.
not helpful.
Yeah.
We need the body to be doing what it's supposed to do so that we have that long-term longevity, right? We have that long-term ability to continue to feel good and continue to thrive. And if we just give the body something that it should be doing on its own, it's never going to do it. And this makes me think about, primal states and rest states and, what those actually mean. And so, while we're here, let's talk about that a little bit. When the body is not, when a body system is not doing what it is supposed to be doing or is not doing it optimally, your body is stressed out about that because it knows that it is not doing the job that it is meant to do, right? And that is going to put your body into a primal state, which, if you, let's just recap this, the primal state is the fight, flight, and for some reason they've added freeze. I don't totally agree with it, but we'll just put it in there. And so that primal state, right, is that or fight or flight kind of state, right? And the body is stressed, and that system right there knows I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And we need to get into a state of rest in order for that system to calm down and take a break, right? Have you ever had a friend that's like going off the deep end and they won't stop doing all of the things and talking and going on, and you're like, just calm down, just calm down. And that's what we want to do to that body system, right? We want that body system to calm down, because until it calms down, we're going to have a really hard time understanding what the actual problem is, what the actual deficiency is. Just like when your friend is going 90 miles a minute, you don't actually know what's going on. You just know that they're extremely stressed because everything is coming out, right? So we want to calm it down. We want it to rest, which is why we're going to remove those foods.
Yep.
For right now,
Yep.
which is going to allow that body system to relax. And once it relaxes, then we can look at it closer and find out now what is missing that keeps that system from producing what it needs to produce. Now, I know I said a lot there, Melissa, and I want you to, whatever you're hearing in there that you want to elaborate on, please do.
I love that though, because that gets into one of the broad underliers of why our bodies can be offline in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And when we can help our body be in the rest state, that's where we start to see recovery happen.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we can start to see regeneration happen. New cells are created. And this time, when they're created, the DNA isn't responding to the stress. It's like, oh, I'm okay. So the next set of cells that are being created, the DNA is closer to the original DNA. We're able to come back, and our bodies are able to then be closer to what we would consider as wellness. It's a process. It's a regeneration process. It's our body's healing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you said that about the DNA structure, right? Because the DNA structure, so many people will think about it being static, right? Like you're born with your DNA structure, that's what it is, and it doesn't change, because we don't see our facial features change after puberty, right? We don't see that sort of thing happen, but it's not true. Your DNA structure will change, can change due to environmental factors, right? So in this case, we're talking about food sensitivities. And
Yep.
so when that food is introduced or whatever, and this system that is struggling with that is struggling with it, the DNA structure will change. And if the cell is damaged, and it will be damaged in a food sensitivity issue like this, and in many other issues that this is what we're talking about, then that cell is going to reproduce, but it's going to reproduce in a damaged fashion. And so what Melissa's talking about is when we can now calm that system down, when that reproduction process happens again, the DNA will shift a little bit because that threat is no longer there. So this is basic evolution, right? And we can do it both ways. We can evolve negatively with our DNA structure, and we can evolve positively with our DNA structure. And cell regeneration. So for people that are listening, this can happen fairly quickly, right? Cell regeneration. We're not talking about years for a cell to regenerate. It's happening all the time, all the
Yep.
time, all the time, all the time. And so we can see fairly quick turnarounds with cellular regeneration, and that system starting to act the way that it is supposed to then. And let me tell you, it becomes a very happy system too. It becomes a very happy system.
Oh, I love this.
And it's a
Yeah.
good thing. So yeah.
I'm really happy to talk about this because it puts in perspective again, like we work with a lot of individuals here who have been sick for a really long time, right? So this is one of the kind of a plug for you that as soon as you start to feel something going off, or you're like, okay, what's going on here? And you might go to the doctor and go, okay, something's not right here. And they do your blood work and they're like, oh, looks okay. Come back and see us next year. And you're like, I know it's not okay. And they pat you on the cheek and say, oh, go home and get a nap, honey. You'll feel better. And after you get done wanting to punch them,
For sure.
know your body is not lying to you. And that's when you start this deeper level of investigation. Because when your body has been not well for a long period of time, it takes longer for this regeneration to start to happen. There are so many other facets. So it can make a difference between you making some gentle shifts and your body coming right back into center, or there being a myriad and years worth of work ahead of you to bring your body back to center. Does that make sense? So understanding that our body is constantly reproducing itself, that's why we get to keep living. Our cells are continually reproducing. Put that in the perspective of, okay, the first time you don't feel right, find somebody who can help you do this investigation and figure out what's going on. A few simple shifts, back on track, away you go. Or deal with the compounding issues that continue and continue. And finally, 20 years later, you find somebody that can do this level of investigation. And finally, you can start to unravel this. Oh, we've got 20 years worth to work on. And it's not going to take you 20 years to get better. Please don't think that. But it is going to take measurably longer than if we had been able to unravel this right at the beginning.
Yeah, I love that. And so a really good call to action here for everyone that's listening is don't wait for it to get worse. Don't wait for it to be something that everybody else can see now on you, right? Which will happen. You'll start to look tired. You'll start to look pasty, pale, whatever. Don't wait for that. When you notice something doesn't feel right in my body, let's look at it now. And this is where, oh my gosh, society and, what does Vision Lakiani call it? Rules, right? Come into place, which by the way are bullshit rules that say that, well, I've just been told that this is normal. This is how I should feel. If I have a headache every other day, I just need to take an aspirin or whatever, and it'll be fine. No, no. You know your body better than anybody else does. Listen to it. And if you will listen to it in the very early stages, your quality of life will go up dramatically. Because not only will you feel better, but you will feel more comfortable with listening to your body and knowing that you do know how to speak the language of your body. It is not complicated. And for those of you who have been, held down and pushed down for many years with, the societal norms and the doctors telling you you're fine, everything's okay, don't worry about it, and you're just getting sicker and sicker and sicker. I also want to say don't beat yourself up right now. And don't get down on yourself right now. Take this as the moment of somebody hears me. Somebody understands what I'm going through and doesn't think I'm crazy. Right?
Nope.
And like
Oh,
Melissa said, if you've been dealing with it for 20 years, yeah, we're going to have more things that we need to uncover than somebody that comes to us within the first 12 months. But it's not going to take us 20 years to go through all of that. We can speed that up, we can shorten that down, and you can start feeling better so much sooner. So wow, what a beautiful discussion today, Melissa.
and it all started with talking about food allergies.
Yeah, exactly. Something so simple, something so simple that we can address very easily, right? But the wealth of information that lives underneath finding that out is incredible. It's not just about what you can and cannot eat. It's about why is your body not wanting you to eat that right now. That's what it's about. So my gosh, thank you so much for sharing what is in your beautiful brain with us today. Again, for everybody listening, I will drop some links down in the show notes. If you have questions, please drop them in the comments as well. Melissa and I will be monitoring the comments as we go along and would love to have some back and forth discussion with you there as well if you have some questions. We'll look forward to seeing you on the next episode. We love you all so much, and we wish you the absolute best in your recovery journey. And we hope that we are coming alongside of you right now with information and value that's helping to propel that journey forward. Thank you all so much.
Awesome.